Welcome to the DoubleTree Cedar Rapids Convention Complex. I'm Jay Anderkin, General Manager. I just want to be able to show you today this wonderful facility with 82,000 square feet of flexible and innovative meeting space and an 8,500 seat arena.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, a special 2-hour edition, Your Risk Management Playbook, presented by Meetings Today with Brenda Rivers. My name is Tyler Davidson. I'm the Vice President and Chief Content Director with Meetings Today, and I'm excited to welcome you to this webinar, one of course, the many that we offer. Our webinars cover a variety of topics, all of which important to the meetings industry, so we hope you'll join us for them all. We also offer a number of newsletters, including our Meetings Today and News Update, the popular Meetings in a Minute Planner Tips, and our more recent Friday with Joan e-newsletter. All that one in collaboration with Joan Eisenstadt, our regular speaker on webinars, and our Friday with our regular blogger for us. And all of that is in addition to our monthly Meetings Today magazine. So be sure to check us out on the web at meetingstoday.com. We would like to begin today with a brief polling question. So a pop-up should appear on your screen momentarily. It will read, please enter the number of people watching this event with you, and please make sure to include yourself. And to answer the question, simply select your response and then click submit. And we'll give you a few seconds to do that. Thank you. Today's webinar is worth 2 clock hours of credit in the risk management domain toward the CMP application through the Events Industry Council. To receive credit for attending the webinar, you must be present for the full 2 hours. And upon completion, you will be taken to the related Meetings Today Webinar Club page to obtain your credit. We encourage you to ask questions during the presentation. You may submit your questions at any time by typing your question in the Ask a Question box below the speaker photo on the left-hand side of the slide deck, and then by hitting send. And should you experience any technical difficulties, please send a message in the Q&A area or call 800-553-8878. And as always, we would like to thank our sponsors. So thanks to our sponsors in the East, Providence Warwick CVB and Meet Atlantic City. Our sponsor in the West, the Anaheim Majestic Garden Hotel. Our sponsors in Mid-America, Sioux Falls CVB and DoubleTree by Hilton Hotel Cedar Rapids Convention Complex. And then finally, our sponsors in the South, Kiowa Island Golf Resort and the Asheville area CVB. So let's quickly review our learning objectives for today's course. They are to understand 4 standards to meet the duty of care for meeting and event professionals, to gain insights into how to involve key stakeholders and achieve buy-in from decision makers, to know how to involve first responders and vendors in the risk management process, and to learn the 6 critical elements to include in a customized risk management playbook for your organization. And then finally, maybe the most important step of all, how to know where to start. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Brenda Rivers. She is the founder and CEO of Andavo Meetings, Incentives and Consulting. With a background in hospitality law, she is certified by the Institute of Crisis Management. And over the past 25 years and spanning 75 countries, Brenda and her team have guided Fortune 1000 companies and nonprofits through event disruptions and catastrophes that include hurricanes, ice storms, serious medical emergencies, bomb threats, hecklers, hopefully we'll have none of those today, homicide, and even a horse running wild. Wow. So she firmly believes that with today's climate unpredictability, natural disasters, pandemics, acts of terrorism, and active shooters, there is a heightened duty of care for meeting sponsors to protect the safety of participants and safeguard the financial integrity and reputation of their organizations. And in her experience, she has found that corporations have extensive risk management and legal teams who manage corporate risk. Most corporate crisis plans fail to address the serious threats to an organization's meetings and events. And she has also written a book, The Meeting and Event Management Guide, How to Develop a Customized Management Playbook, and more on that later. It was written from the meeting professional's point of view and offers a 6-step process to develop a risk management playbook that is replicable for any type of event. Readers will learn the 4 critical actions to fulfill their duty of care to keep attendees safe and mitigate the financial, legal, and reputational damage to their organization in advance. And the book also contains practical templates, checklists, and procedures that are customizable and apply to any type of crisis. And Meetings Today has partnered with Brenda to produce this book. So if you're interested in purchasing the book, you can do so on our website at www.books.meetingstoday.com. Make sure to use the discount code SAVE20, and then you'll save $20 on it. So make sure to check that out and use that discount code SAVE20. And with that, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our speaker today, Brenda Rivers. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you so much, Tyler, for that incredible introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be a very busy 2 hours. I very much appreciate everyone being on this session today. This 2-hour webinar was designed to give you a training overview on how you can develop your own customized meeting and event risk management playbook. We are going to include a few interactive exercises, so you will get to test exactly how your preparedness skills are. You will be asked to respond to a 10-minute crisis test and to complete a final survey. Now, I understand all too well that preparing for an event crisis or disruption is a somber subject. As a matter of fact, over the last several years, I've been working with in-house meeting teams, training them to be more prepared. And more than once, I've had them tell me that I have filled them with terror. So I'm promising you today, I'm going to try not to fill you with terror, but to give you very positive resolutions for dealing with risk in a confident manner. And also, I am very passionate about this meeting and event risk management strategy. I'm excited to be able to reach such a large audience today. My main goal, we do have learner objectives that we will cover, but my main goal today is at the end of 2 hours, I would hope that you would be thinking differently about how you're managing risk for your events today. This training overview is based on developing a pre-event risk management strategy, a strategy that will enable you to prevent, to minimize, or to mitigate a crisis or a disaster should it strike your event. So let's ask the question, why are we all here today? Why are we taking 2 hours out to discuss this really important topic? Safety and security are a top priority for all of us in the industry. I assume that most of you are on the planning side or the meeting organizing side, but I also anticipate there are other members of the hospitality industry present. I don't need to remind you that we live in a world of uncertainty and disruption, and this is not likely to change. With tragedies over the last few years like Mandalay Bay, the Pulse nightclub, the Neocon accident, terrorist attacks, random acts of violence, the increase in natural disasters, threats of pandemics, cyber fraud, sexual harassment, the list goes on. We are here today, I think, because we are all concerned that we're not doing enough to keep our attendees safe in case a disaster strikes. And it's not just planners. When I meet with hotels, DMCs, other venues that we work with for our programs, audiovisual production and trade show companies, and convention center staff. We all agree we're in this together. But when it comes to risk mitigation, which is preparing ahead of the event, we really aren't talking to each other. So my experience as a planner for the last 25 years and having some experience with quite a few different types of crises, I decided to begin a research project 4 years ago, and I researched the legal duty of care. I discovered that there are no clearly defined standards for the meeting industry that give us best practices that we can integrate into how we design our meetings. And so I set about the task of writing several white papers on duty of care. They were a little bit long and boring. And so that moved me to start developing a practical guidebook that was based on my trial and error experiences working with my planners and working with other corporate client planners, to develop a way that a planner or an organizer could develop their own customized strategy and not have to use a security manual or a checklist. While maybe very helpful, they are not customized for your specific company or your specific event. And so that led me to write the book that Tyler just showed you. And it started out as a notebook with a class, and now it's been produced into a training manual. I'm going to be referring to some of the templates in this book today, which would be available to you after this seminar. What I have found and what I believe is that the hospitality industry is not really as prepared as most schools, hospitals, and office buildings to deal with a sudden crisis or disaster. I do believe that in the last year, we have seen an increase on the focus of our industry in risk management. Every industry publication has great articles now on safety and security. There are seminars, there are webinars, really good ones, that offer you checklists, safety manuals, active shooter and natural disaster training. And I know that many large companies have risk management teams that provide disaster training to their employees, and all of this is fantastic. So this is definitely on the top of our priority. But what happens is it becomes overwhelming. So for the planner or the organizer, we do have all this information, but we still feel like we don't know how to make this replicable and flexible for our own specific programs and events. And so this is what we're going to focus on today in the next 2 hours. We are going to be talking from a meeting planner's perspective because we've all been there. And even if those of you in the audience are not on the meeting planning side, you're on another side of hospitality industry, you're going to relate exactly to this. Our industry is focused on creating a flawless event. We're focused on achieving important business goals for our clients and for the meeting sponsors. We always have a lack of time, resources, and support, so there never seems like there's enough time to focus on risk management. We don't really have industry standards, not even in our CMP standard training, something that's easy for us to relate to and integrate. And it's overwhelming. There seems to be some new risk or challenge or threat every day. And at the end, none of these crises or disruptions will happen, are likely to happen anyway. And so coming from this point of view in dealing with all the events that we have to deal with, we often just don't get to it. So today, again, I want you to leave understanding 2 most important concepts. And I'm going to say these more than once. The first one is to understand the 4 duty of care standards that you have as a meeting organizer or a meeting planner. And by the way, these duty of care standards, They're based on legal duty of care, and they also will apply to other stakeholders in our industry. So the duty of care standards, when you know what those are, then how do you meet those duty of care standards? And that's the second part that we'll focus on. And that is actually the 6 key elements that you would put in your risk management playbook. So once you begin to understand, there's just 4 duty of care standards that you need to know and 6 steps you need to take, you're on your way to being able to write your own risk management playbook. It's really that easy. So this is going to be our first interactive exercise. And it's also the first step that you would take in your risk management strategy. We all know that for any strategic initiative to be a success, you first have to know what's your current state. You have to do some type of a reality process. And so we're going to take the next 5 minutes. You're going to be given 10 questions, and they're simply answered yes or no. We aren't going to see your answers except in a group, so you can be very, very honest. And after the questionnaire, the results will be shown for the entire audience. So I can actually see them on my screen. I'm not sure if our audience can see the questions. Okay, somebody saw them. Great.
I saw them pop up on my screen too,
Perfect.
but since I'm one of the hosts, I couldn't register my vote.
All right, thank you. They're coming in now. Wonderful.
We need the Jeopardy theme song.
I know, right?
Playing. I'll make a note of that for next time.
Let's see. Someone cannot hear. Someone's having difficulty hearing. Another person can't see the polling. Oh my goodness. Well,
I think Jessica will probably handle that on the back end.
okay.
Our webinar producer. Maybe we should just sort of move on with the presentation.
All right. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I can take these off. I guess I can.
Oh, I see them. Yeah, there you go.
Here we go. All right. I hope that the audience can see the results that are coming in.
And I see the results here. Wow, and it says 54% have experienced a meeting or event crisis. It's a lot higher than I thought it would be. What do you think about that, Brenda?
That tells me that we have a fairly experienced audience, certainly a more senior level of the planning category here.
Is running out of coffee? That's not a crisis, right? Maybe for some people.
No. Also, it is showing that almost 50% of the opinion is that their organization was handled to equip the meeting crisis, and 60% were not prepared to handle the crisis.
And I guess that's open to some interpretation. I mean, you as an expert in this would probably say, of those 40%, how many of those maybe thought they were prepared to handle it? But I guess there's so many levels of preparedness you can have.
That is actually characterizes something that I call the difference between perceived competence and capable competence, because generally speaking, the meeting organizer and the executive sponsors of most meetings and events will respond to a questionnaire, more than 70% are confident that their organization, their meeting teams, and their risk management teams are prepared and competent to handle a crisis. However, when probed further, they will recognize the fact that they are not necessarily meeting their duty of care standards as well as they should be, and they do not have a specific, separate, customized risk management strategy for most of their more complex meetings and events. So that is one of the things in your playbook. The very first step that you take in your playbook is to assess your current state. And not only do you assess your current state with your executives, with your meetings team, but you also would want to conduct a readiness poll with the team that actually goes on site. And that leads us to the next topic. Once we have determined how prepared we are, we then need to understand the key concepts that I related to in the beginning. This is probably the most important slide and the basis of my guidebook, which is understanding the 4 duty of care standards: the duty to investigate, the duty to inform, to recommend, and to prepare. And that right now, looking at its face, seems a little bit vague. It's like, well, what does this mean? How do I know how to meet this duty? And what am I going to be judged on? Well, then you look over and you see the 6 elements that are contained in your risk management strategy. And frankly, when you're writing a risk management playbook for your company that would apply to any and all of your types of events, you may add to this table of contents, or you may expand on them, or you may shorten them. The nice thing about this is it's designed to be flexible, expandable, and organic. But if you integrate these 2 basic concepts, then you have everything you need to write your own risk management playbook. And I'm going to make sure that you understand what I mean by that, because it does seem to be overwhelming. So let's talk a little bit in detail about duty of care. These are legal standards. They're based on the responsibility that a professional, like a meeting organizer, a meeting planner, a hotelier, a DMC, professionals in the industry who have a relationship with our audience, with our attendees. We have invited them to attend the meeting, to be our guest. Then we have standards that we need to meet, similar to a hotel has standards to its guests, a transportation company and driver has to its passengers. It's very similar in understanding the duty of care. And many of these are second nature, and they're also part of what a meeting planner and a meeting organizer is trained to do. What's different here is that to meet your duty of care and to create a written record that you have done all that you can do, you definitely need to have a section in your meeting planning notebook that shows that you fulfill these 4 standards. The first one, duty to investigate, is a natural to meeting planners, and that includes investigating the destination, the hotel, how safe is your hotel, investigating your venues, your offsite venues, your activities, city hotels, resorts, international destinations, investigating what types of known and obvious risks or threats exist in your choice of destination and venue. Again, this happens in the RFP stage and the sourcing stage. It should become a part of your site inspection, and it should become a part of your RFP. You should investigate all of your suppliers their insurance, their training record, and safety record. And it's a duty for the planner to anticipate potential but foreseeable disruptions. Medical resources must be within the standard of care depending upon the demographics and size of the group. And I can say with a lot of confidence that I think this is being done by every professional meeting organizer and meeting planner, and it's being documented. So we move into the second duty, and that is a duty to inform. What do I mean inform? Who do you have to tell? Well, there's two main audiences that you need to advise the results of your investigation, and you need to make a written memorandum. You advise your client, you advise the organizer, you advise the entity that is paying for and sponsoring the event of what you have investigated. You advise them of the foreseeable threats and crises, weather issues, if it's jellyfish season at the resort, the 5-star resort where you're taking an incentive, you obviously will advise that this is one of the situations that you need to prepare for. Again, it's common sense. You also need to inform or warn your attendees. We can no longer avoid giving attendees for any type of meeting or event advanced FAQs. And now we have the technology that makes it very easy. We have the mobile apps where we can include a be safe and stay safe FAQ. Your attendees have a responsibility for their own safety as well. It's not just the responsibility for the meeting planner to keep them safe, but they're responsible for paying attention and for knowing how to find the evacuation routes, knowing how to find medical help. But your duty is to make that information available. If there's known criminal activity around the area of a city hotel where you're holding an event, you need to be able to have warnings that people need to be careful. Again, these are things that I know meeting planners are very accustomed to doing. It's in their DNA, but it must be made a record. You must have it in your meeting notebook. So if there's ever an issue that you were negligent, you've got this all documented as part of your meeting project plan. The third thing is the duty to recommend. So I want to just point out that so far, everything I'm talking about is happening pre-event. All of this activity has nothing to do with the crisis that has happened or is happening. It has to do with your mitigation techniques, your mitigation plans. You take the information and you make recommendations to the meeting organizer of possibly hiring additional security. If you've consulted with the local security at the hotel or the convention center, they're going to be very definite about what their role and responsibility will be and whether or not you should hire your own security. Most events today that have more than 100 people in meal functions or in activities are hiring their own EMT. If you look at the cost-benefit analysis, it's $35 an hour, generally speaking, to hire your own private EMT. And that is a very small cost to make sure that you have medical care on site for your event. The attendee information is also the area that you need to make recommendations. You need to give the attendees information on what step they need to take to know where the evacuation routes are in the event there is a fire or a power outage, or at the very worst circumstance, some threat of violence or act of violence, or even the worst active shooter. Attendees need to have in their possession access to evacuation routes. And then we come to the fourth duty of care, which is really the part that we're talking about today. It's when you put everything together, it's putting your plans together, it's creating your crisis response plans, it's creating your crisis communication strategy. knowing whether or not you need professionals there to help with any crowd control. These lists could go on, but the main point is that this is a list for you to develop based upon your duty of care and based upon your own event, your own destination, and the complexity of your program. So we're now going to engage in another interactive exercise. The purpose of this 10-minute crisis test is to have you step into the shoes of actually being at an event where there are not one, not two, not three, but probably over 5 different types of foreseeable crises that really did happen. This is based on a true event in an exhibit hall. You are not really going to have 10 minutes to decide what you would do, how you would act, what you would say, and what actions you would take, because in truth, most crises like the Pulse tragedy and this type of a crisis is over in less than 10 minutes. So when we're going through this, the scenarios, there will be 3 scenarios that will unfold. And it illustrates the importance of having a risk management playbook in advance of being thrown into a crisis like this. You're going to need to have your laptop or a pen and paper ready. We're not going to be able to share your responses to these questions, but this is a test for yourself to write down at the end of each scenario how you would handle this. So the scenario is this. This is the stage. You are the logistics team leader in an exhibit hall for a 2,500 person conference. And you and your team are stationed at the front of the hall with your team members, including some volunteers. Someone comes up to your booth and they advise you that there are 2 hecklers that have come in without badges in the back of the exhibit hall. And this is a 50,000 square foot exhibit hall, so this is at the opposite end of the hall where you're located. There are going to be 3 scenes that will unfold, and you will have 1 minute, not 3, to write down how you will react and what you will do and how you are feeling. And then at the end, we will identify what crises occurred in this scenario and what mattered most. We'll be thinking about if you had developed a risk management playbook like we're talking about, what would you have put in that playbook that would have helped you be prepared? I hope that was clear, but it will become clear when we start the crisis test. So please write down your own answers within the 1 minute time allotment.
It's day 2 of a 3,000 person conference in a downtown convention center. You are the head of the logistics team for the trade show. It is now 3:30 in the afternoon. 200 sponsor booths are open, and there are about 400 attendees in the hall with their swag bags. The sponsor's hospitality booth is at the front of the exhibit hall, across from the entrance of the 50,000 square foot hall. You, 3 logistics team members, and 8 volunteers are staffing the booth. Where is everyone else? The CEO and company top executives are in gala rehearsals next door in the ballroom. Other team members are busy in other areas of the convention center and the staff office. Then, 2 painters in overalls enter through the exhibit hall's back doors from the loading dock area. They are carrying bulging exhibitor bags and are laughing loudly. They begin pointing at people, calling them names. Some attendees notice them but walk away. The painters become aggressive. You and your team are unaware of the disturbance, and there are no security guards in plain sight. Someone runs to your booth to alert you. What do you do? What are your actions? What are your emotions? What are you thinking? You have to act. The two painters are now threatening people. You go back to see what is happening. You are concerned about what is in their bags and what are their intentions. Attendees and exhibitors are now starting to panic, screaming and running away, but still others are attempting to interact with the painters. The protesters yell, "We left a present for you. You are all going to burn in hell." Someone tells you that they saw the men enter from the loading dock area. So what do you do? Are you interacting with the protesters? How are you managing the panicked attendees? Where is convention security? Who else are you concerned about? You have to act. Six security guards have arrived and attempt to restrain the men. A gun falls out of their bag that is filled with propaganda materials. People are screaming, "How do we get out of here?" And they're pushing each other out of the way to get to the exits. You are getting texts and phone calls from the CEO and board members. And finally, after 7 minutes, the SWAT team arrives. Convention security turns the scene over to police and begin to evacuate the crowd. You and your staff are helping with the evacuation, and you are seeing that phone and tweets and Instagram photos of the scene are multiplying. The SWAT team is moving out of the building, which is now surrounded by police and fire teams. What do you do? Who do you respond to first, and what do you say? What should you be doing with the attendees and exhibitors? Who is handling the media calls which the board and CEO are now getting? Rumors are flying. What information is accurate? How will you advise the public, friends, and family outside the event? And how will you keep the event moving forward safely and successfully? You have to act.
So I'd like to take a few minutes and have people think about all of the different types of crises that existed in this one scenario. And you see on a screen, these are nine potential crises or actual crises or disruptions that could have turned into a crisis in this one 10-minute scenario. So if we're able, are we able to use the chat feature right now for people to send in comments?
Yeah, I believe I've been seeing if we have one come in.
Okay, great.
Yes. All right. So yeah, feel free to send in your comments in the chat room, and then Brenda will handle those.
So if people have comments that they would like to share in terms of how they felt about their reaction to this scenario, I would be very happy to share with the group or to react to them. So obviously the first, exactly, that's the very first response that I always get is there's no time. A crisis is always unexpected and you have little or no time to think, much less react. And the first thing you have to deal with is your own fear and panic. So the first response we had was, I felt like there was not a lot of time to react. You have to think fast and stay calm. Another responder was to have called 911 followed by facility security. One of the very obvious occurrences in this scenario, which by the way is a scenario that I experienced, was security was very late in showing up. And that is not an unusual occurrence, not because security in a convention center or security in a hotel ballroom is not doing their job. But typically, there's not a lot of security. Unless you've hired your own security, you will rarely even see a security person in sight. And there are very strict guidelines and recommendations. If you've had a pre-event security meeting, which is part of your mitigation strategy, you are usually told under what circumstances you should or should not call 911. And there are reasons that have to do with keeping 911 in the right direction, especially if it's a large convention center or it's a hotel with a lot of different groups. Oftentimes, if 911 is called by a participant, they don't always know exactly how to give directions. So in my experience, most security at convention centers and hotel want to be called first, and they dispatch 911. And then you have to think, well, how long do I wait before I call 911? So that is the question that you have a very short time to think about and answer. And it is certainly never going to be wrong to dial 911. But there's another issue that comes up, and if you haven't had any pre-mitigation rehearsals, that is, if there's a bomb threat, is it safe to use your cell phone? So what are your options to reaching security or reaching 911 if you don't want to use your cell phone? And quite frankly, if you think there's a bomb and it's close by, it's not a good idea to use your cell phone. So another reaction was the person said, I felt scattered, but I did have a plan. So that's completely normal. And I think it would change if you didn't have a plan, if there had been no pre-event mitigation plan, there was no risk management plan, no rehearsals, you would feel more than scattered. You would feel downright panicked and probably not very capable. Another answer is remaining calm and using muscle memory of what to do. I'm sure that everyone understands understands how you get muscle memory. That is the ultimate goal of creating a risk management strategy. A pre-event mitigation plan is how you get muscle memory. It's by practicing a plan for each one of these crises. And quite frankly, if you do this once with an event, a significant event, an important event, where you recognize you do have each one of these potential crises as foreseeable threats to your event, protesters or hecklers. There are many programs today where there are known demonstrators either targeting your event or known demonstrators in the area, especially if it's a city program, or if you have a controversial speaker, controversial subject, or just general people that are unhappy and they want to interrupt your event. Bomb threats. I recently spoke to the head of police in the 8th District in New Orleans when I was consulting for a client who had a 10,000 person program there in January, and the chief of police over all of the special events relayed to us in our pre-event training program with him that they had had 6 bomb threats in and around the convention center in that month. 6 bomb threats. All of them were hoaxes. But guess what? You have to treat the bomb threat as a real bomb threat, which means your program is going to be interrupted. You're going to have to evacuate people, at least within the area of the bomb threat, and your program is going to become delayed. And there's more likely than not some type of social media reporting going on. And I like Joan's reaction. It began with the first slide. Clearly, there was no prep. Crowd management is huge. If you have not recognized in an exhibit hall of a large number of people, which is happening daily in our industry, that crowd control is something that your team needs to be trained on, then you are not prepared. Crowd control is something that we often think is going to be handled by someone else. But if we haven't met with our first responders ahead of time, we have no idea how we're going to handle a crowd like this running, racing out of the exhibit hall. Medical emergency should be on everyone's list. You should always be prepared for a medical emergency at any and every event. Another response, which is so true, if any of you have been in this, everything is a priority. And you're right. All of it. It's all hitting you at once. And from my experience and those that I know who've been through even one of these, it's always the meeting planner that people look to. No matter what kind of program, no matter where security is, everyone looks to you. So if I'm the head of logistics and I've got my team, and my team are made up of volunteers and they're made up of junior planners, and we're all at the front booth and we're all greeting people and everything is going great, and all of a sudden people are coming to us to tell them what to do. Always call security first, no hesitation, absolutely. The question that I have in terms of your risk mitigation is your team already trained? Are they trained so that it's their muscle memory? They know exactly, they don't have to fumble for a checklist. They know exactly how to call security. How do I reach security? Do they have security's number programmed into their cell phone? And in the alternative, if they can't use their cell phone, do they know how to go and find a house phone, or do they know how to run out in the hall and find security? Security call is always first on the radio. And the answer is, yeah, the assumption, Joan is right. There was no preparation ahead. One person, which is a very, very typical reaction, I am small in size, so I'm concerned for my safety and if they would take me seriously. There's a big question because when I've done this exercise before, it's usually the men in the audience that their first reaction is to go back and try to physically restrain or physically interact with the protester, especially when they don't know that there's potential for a gun. And again, there's never a perfectly right answer. It's always the best answer under the circumstances and the best answer for you. And the way you find out what that is going to be is by having a risk mitigation plan in advance where you actually, you and your team, rehearse these types of crises. Okay, so I can go on. Your answers are very insightful, especially now I'm getting to the one about social media, because all of you know that immediately, as soon as the attendees notice what's going on, some of them are going to be panicked and wanting to run away, and others are going to want to be taking pictures. And so your program is now going to be broadcast out in social media. And that leads you to talk about, do we have what is our messaging strategy? Who's in charge? Who do I call right away to let the communication hub know that this is going on and they need to start addressing the tweets and start addressing the social media threat that we have? We didn't even talk about protecting the executives that are next door in the ballroom. So you can see that this is normally about a 30-minute exercise, but I think it's effective in bringing this up to you. And I want to move to the second part of the question, which is the question that you should be answering that leads you to the development of your pre-event risk management plan is what mattered most. And these are just some of the reactions. So if you were to sit down and write down, what would you put in your risk management plan that would have helped prepare you for this? What would have mattered most? And these are just some of the answers that come up. Number one, you have trained your team that attendee safety is number one. So if that's the case, then do we already know who's in charge? That's one thing that comes up, not only the speed of the actions, but people look around and say, who's in charge? And what are the roles and the responsibilities of your team? What are the roles and the responsibilities of the trade show host? You have responders, you have your production team inside that exhibit hall, you have your trade show team inside that exhibit hall. They have their own emergency response plans. Do you know what they're capable of doing and how do you reach them? Who are the rest of your first responders? How are they going to assist you? Do you have EMT? Did you hire an EMT to be stationed in your exhibit hall? Which again is now top of my list to recommend anyone. If you've got a situation in a conference like this, you need an EMT on call in your exhibit hall. It's just a matter of standard procedures. You definitely have to expect that a medical emergency would happen in this scenario. It's not in the script for the scenario because I didn't take it long enough, but someone is going to get hurt. And again, we talked about crowd control, rapid response, messaging strategy, executive protection. How do you recover from this? Because this true example was a hoax. It was no bomb. It was a real gun, but it wasn't loaded. But this event was stopped it had the SWAT team came in through the lobby, and everyone saw the SWAT team, and it was a pretty major panic. And so once the SWAT team had restrained and taken out the protesters, then your team, the meeting and event team, along with the convention center security, had to mobilize and get messaging out to take care of the attendees, to calm them down, and to have a plan to resume. So I'm going to move on now because there's not really a way to do a two-way discussion, but the purpose, where we are in the 2 hours, is we've come to the place where we have talked about how you assess your current state. And I'm talking about you, meaning you personally as a meeting organizer, you personally as the head of this event on the meeting side. And I'm talking about your organization who has sponsored and paid for and is ultimately responsible for the safety of this event. So when you're writing your risk management strategy, at the time you begin your event design, you must engage in some type of a assessment of how prepared you are. And knowing that 70% of the sponsors and 70% of the executives are going to believe that your team is prepared, you might just have to convince those executives that they need to give you the support, meaning the time and the money, to invest in a risk management playbook. And I'm hoping and assuming that, again, everyone understands the rationale and everyone knows how to use a similar or the same type of preparedness questionnaire to administer it to all the stakeholders. You have a nice lunch, and it's a lunch to discuss, keeping attendees safe, and a lunch to discuss with your executives and your sponsors the recommendations that you're making to integrate risk management strategy into your meeting design. And you take them through an exercise like this. It's very effective. It's also very effective to have someone from the police department in the location where your event is held, the police department, to come in and speak to your group. You'd be surprised at how responsive the chief of police in New Orleans was when I invited him to come to Denver and speak to a client about keeping events safe in the city of New Orleans and what the police division is prepared to do. It was probably the most impactful part of the assessment process, was to invite someone from the police department. And frankly, I thought that he would say no. I thought he wouldn't even take my call. And I see a chat here. So if there's enough security, okay, so great. Question, do most of you request security information from your venues at the RFP stage so that you can budget accordingly? Very, very important. And that comes later on in my step 3 in the risk management plan, is gathering information, finding out, identifying at the RFP stage who are your responders going to be, and absolutely asking them to share their emergency procedures with you in advance so that you can make the business case to your executive who has to approve the budget that you need extra funds to be able to pay for your own hired security. As a matter of fact, once you start this risk management best practice in your event design, your executives will generally never refuse to approve extra funds to have security at your events. They realize that there's so much at stake, and that the cost, especially when you mention the fact that the amount of money that's spent on alcohol or activities is probably 100% more than what you're asking for it to spend on the cost for security or an EMT or hired private police. So this comment is excellent. My organization has been hosting police and EMT security meetings 30 days in advance before the major event, 16,000 people, for many years. And in the 13 years I've been here, the police are always willing to meet for an hour. We host a unified command room in the center at this event. Absolutely. I wish that I heard that more from meetings that are not necessarily that large. I can't imagine doing a meeting of, over 1,000 people without that, but it happens. Okay, so we are at a little after the first hour. A good rule of thumb is to budget 5 to 10% of our overall budget for emergency services. And do a pre-con with the security in the center. And sometimes we have hired off-duty police officers. It's a big event. Yes, a pre-con, a separate security pre-con has got to be a best practice as part of a risk mitigation playbook. It can't be the same pre-con, because you all know what the typical event pre-con has a different business purpose. It has a different message, and the security briefing that happens in the regular pre-con is not nearly as in-depth. Security briefings need to be just on their own time, and it should really include a walkthrough of the evacuation routes. In some cases, it should include, as we did at this meeting in New Orleans, the head of security for the New Orleans Convention Center did an active shooter training with the entire meeting staff, as well as walk through all of the evacuation routes. So if someone conducts a security pre-con, would you be willing to share your agenda for that session? We have a request for that. Who should be in attendance at the security pre-con? Well, I typically invite at the pre-con all of the heads of security from the participating hotels, certainly the head of security for the venue, the main venue, if it's hotel or if it is convention center, the head of security is asked to co-lead it or lead it. The police officer who's in charge should be invited, as well as the EMT and any private security team. Everyone that has an emergency procedures plan that would be called into action for your event should be invited to this pre-con meeting. And that's the time when your events team can actually talk about various scenarios, if not rehearse scenarios, such as what is the process if the power goes out? What is the process if there's a threat of violence? What is the process if someone is physically threatening a speaker? That is the best place to do the rehearsals, is that pre-con security. Okay, so make sure all police parties are invited. Yes, all police parties, you're absolutely right. Boston has 2 police teams. 2 hours is absolutely the minimum. This cannot be a introductory, like go around the room and introduce who you are and just tell everybody how safe you're going to keep us. No, you have to go into their emergency procedures. And the most important outcome for this is to have them tell you who do we call, how do we reach you, what are you going to do, and what do we do with the attendees until you come? Those are the 4 things for us meeting planners. Who do we call? What are you going to do? And sometimes, how long will it take you to get here? And what do we do with the attendees until you arrive? And what happens if we can't reach you? What happens if there's, my phone is dead, or, what's the backup? I don't have a radio. Okay, so let's move on. And if everyone is, I think everyone is definitely, teed up for the fact that we have now completed the first stage, which is how to assess how prepared we are, to know how prepared are we. In that last scenario, they weren't prepared at all. Maybe they had a checklist, but they didn't have any pre-event risk management planning. And so someone else mentioned that you begin building your risk management playbook in the very beginning. As soon as you have your event has been approved, your destination has been chosen, is when you build a section in your meeting playbook. There's a section for risk management, and you involve your team. I have worked with in-house meeting teams, and the most effective way to empower your team to help handle their fear and panic, to help them be as informed as possible, and to help them create muscle memory, and to give them ownership, is you involve your team, the entire team. And then later on, if you have volunteers or you have temps, you want to have kind of a separate training session for them. But the goal for your playbook is that this playbook, it can be a spiral notebook, and it's meant to be replicable. So if you have a large event, like this 10,000 person event I just worked with, their notebook was, they had 2 notebooks because they had 6 different venues. And so they had to have a crisis response plan for every venue. The main convention venue, the program hotel where all of the VIPs and the major staff stayed. And then they had 4 or 5 offsite venues, large venues. So there was a crisis response plan, and they had transportation buses taking people around the city. So they needed a crisis response plan for each one. But you could have a very small notebook. The important thing is that you have the same structure. You have those 5 elements in that notebook. It integrates into your event design. This needs to be part of your planning process. Just as important as food and beverage, speaker management. Again, it has to be interactive. It's nothing that you can create one time and put on your shelf and say, okay, we've got our notebook. Got a chat. Yes, I will repeat the 5 elements. We're going to start them up. We're going to start them again. I told you you would see them over and over again, and you will in just a moment. Thank you. I like this very much. As meeting planners, we need to rely on our vendors more. Going to a big convention, rely on them and inquire what their procedures look like, and have a conversation with all your vendors so that everyone is looped in. Absolutely, and I actually have a template for that coming up. This is a great audience. And keep the chats coming in. When you create this type of notebook, again, it is, and you involve your entire team and you involve your decision makers, you will see how the process will apply to any kind of crisis or disruption. So, okay. So these are the table of contents. This is a copy of my book. I'm not like trying to sell my book or anything, but I actually used the contents of this. Okay, I've got some chats here. This was in a notebook, and I had a professor at the university here in Denver ask me to create this into a actual workbook. And so that's what this looks like. And these are the 6 elements. First, know your current state. How prepared are you? And you have to do this more than once. How prepared are you in general as a company to handle risk? And how prepared are you for this particular program? Because you have new people, you have new team members, you want to find out how prepared are we to handle risk. The second really important thing you have to do is you have to assess your risk. You have to conduct a vulnerability assessment. You have to identify the foreseeable crises that could happen to your event. And the third one is what you were all just talking about, is you have to identify who are your resources, who is going to come and take care of the crisis. It's not the meeting planner. The meeting planner doesn't have a duty to save the day. The meeting planners do not have to do CPR. You're not responsible for that. You are responsible for knowing how to get help, knowing who the help is, knowing what they're going to do. And there's a long process for that. And that starts in the beginning, identifying them. Once you've done that, then you take your risk and you take your resources and you build your crisis response plan. Then you integrate the crisis communication plan and a plan to recover. These are the 6 steps. You may need another step in there, but 99% of the time, everything that you need falls under these steps. So I'm going to move on. The first one we've talked about a lot. It's the first part of your notebook. You have, and I don't like to bring up the legal side of things, but if you were to ever have any type of a negligence action brought against you as a planner, you as the organizer, and you have an organized risk management notebook with written documentation that you have done all of these steps, I can't make a broad statement that you wouldn't be sued for negligence, because anybody can be sued for anything, but you would have a very strong case to show, even though that there were serious damages and injuries, the meeting planner and the meeting organizer was not negligent. They did everything that was reasonably possible for a professional meeting organizer, and your organization did everything that was possible. And the first thing is you document that you assessed how prepared you were. And I've given you the tools to create that assessment. You put some of your team through a crisis simulation. I've got multiple different types of crisis simulations, or you use one that you've had. And then you end up asking them to define what matters most to us. What's the most important thing we need to do for this program, right? So the next thing is, and anyone in your organization who handles risk, any kind of risk, corporate risk, you have a very strong corporate risk department, most likely, and a corporate risk team. You open up any training manual, the first thing is you have to identify your risk. You have to assess the risk. I call it a vulnerability study. You can call it a risk assessment. And you need to identify what are the top foreseeable crises, things that you could think of that might happen. They maybe aren't likely to happen, but they could. And what would their impact be financially, in terms of people's safety? And then you take these identified foreseeable crises, and they have to be part of your crisis response plan. I'm going to show you. This is what my vulnerability study looks like. It's in my book, but this is a condensed version. And you can add any more that you need to these 12 points, and the study actually has about 6 or 7 subheadings underneath each one. So under the type of event, it gives you categories. For putting this on the screen, I couldn't have 3 or 4 pages on the screen. And you rank it. This is not a scientific study, but this is a way for you to show to your executives or to show to, you know, your legal department, hey, we did a vulnerability study. What makes your program vulnerable? The type of event, the visibility, the size, accessibility, so on and so forth. History of previous disruptions. And then you would give them a score, and then you've got this. And you don't really have to do a lot with this, but this also helps if you are recommending to your company or your client to purchase event cancellation insurance. The insurance brokers are all over this. As a matter of fact, if they see and you show them that you have a risk management notebook, a risk management pre-event mitigation strategy, you will almost always, I've never seen it be denied, but you get a reduction in your premium. Sometimes it's a significant premium reduction when you present this type of a risk management strategy. And yes, you're absolutely right. The chat always purchase event cancellation insurance. But I have to say, in my experience, it's the exception rather than the rule. The larger, more costly events have event cancellation insurance, but you know, small events can be just as much at risk for damage and violence as a large event. So, you know, not every organizer wants to spend the money. I like this comment, have staff emergency response training, train staff before you get on site. Absolutely. Absolutely. We do training on our staff, like, you know, in the early stage to kind of get them sensitized to it. And then they don't learn. When you're training any of your staff and you read them a manual or you read them this book, they don't learn from it. They learn from standing up on their feet and being given a scenario and being put on the spot with a timer. This is happening to you. What are you going to do? That's the way they learn. That gives them the muscle memory. So going back to that vulnerability study, I think I made the point that when you determine the foreseeable risks, then you're going to write them down in a notebook, and then they will become the basis for your crisis plan. So the third key element in your notebook is assemble your team. Identify your resources and your responders. And your resources and responders are not just the hotel security or the fire department or an EMT or the medical. It's also DMCs, the venues, the AV production and trade show companies. Every single one of your partners, your hospitality partners, have some type of emergency protocol. And someone just mentioned it in the chat. We need to involve them more. I just was working with the group last week, and they had a big concern about how do you involve, you know, venues like in Colorado. We have so many just one-time venues that people can, you know, they go off property. They have a big event at a hotel, but they want to go to downtown Denver to one of the new venues that's really fun, and they want to do, you know, a mixology event, and then they want to have a dinner, and they're in and out in one night. But do those people have any type of emergency protocol? Do they know how to reach police and fire? So you definitely have to have a standard, I think, process for involving the venues that you're working with. And not to mention, I mean, it goes without saying, all the different activities that you hire, whether it's canvas and cocktails or Jeep tours up in Vail, or, it's scuba diving or some type of fishing event on the water. If you are on an incentive trip, I have some horror stories that have happened over the years, when we've taken large groups out on snorkeling trips, and we thought we had checked on the training and the alcohol use of the captain and the instructor for the snorkeler, and they actually were drinking as much as or more as the team. And oh my gosh, I think back and I think we were so lucky that no one got hurt. And now it's a different day. So just a little bit of a side note. So we're talking about the team. So it's in the RFP and the sourcing process is when you identify who are your partners going to be. What venues are you going to be using? And you want to make sure that they are very open and very positive about sharing their emergency procedures with you, and also telling you what past disruptions and crises have they been through. Always ask for past history, and meeting with those teams early on and having them participate, asking for their current emergency protocols. And I'll just say, it has been more often than not when I even ask convention centers, big convention centers, recent convention centers, for their emergency protocols, and they're dated 2015. So that's something else. It's not just getting their protocol list, it's making sure that everything is updated. And then once you put that together, you have your list of who are all the important people for us to call. And then doing rehearsals, including those folks in the rehearsals. So this is just an example of a form that I put together that's in my book. My team was having a really hard time organizing, okay, how do we know who our resources and responders are? How do we get them organized? How do we create a checklist? And so the development of your crisis response plan is contingent upon your getting updated emergency protocols from all your third-party resources. So the venues, the convention centers, DMCs, private security, once you've got them all hired, or you would probably get, I would normally ask for that information in the RFP process. So if you can see on this form, I've got the names of the potential responders across the top. And then on the side, I have, when you collect these things before contracting, collect them before the event, or collect them on site. And then this is a way that your team can just check it off. You just put somebody in charge of collecting all of these. The contracts with these vendors should include a risk management clause. When we talk about contracts in a minute, I have a safety and security or a risk management clause that requires that they will agree to give you updated emergency documents, and they will agree to participate in pre-event crisis training if necessary. And you can also add third-party sources like IJET, ISOS for international programs to this list. So this template is available to you. I'm not really pushing my book, but again, this is a lot of practical. You could write this yourself, or you can get this book, and then we will send you over 20 templates. I'm not supposed to plug the book, but.
And I got to say, really, I mean, the purpose of the book, or one of the main purposes, is really to accompany presentations like this with a lot of checklists. And then you did mention the digital handouts. So super cool. And then use that code I mentioned before, so you get $20 off too.
Yes, and the book itself is not in soft copy. It's not downloadable, but you will receive, if you purchase the book from Meetings Today now or within the next month, you will receive soft copy of about 20 templates, 20 of the templates that you can just download, into your own file. And they're not in PDF, they're in open format, because they are really meant to be yours. They're meant to be organic, and you'll need to change them not only for your company, but you'll need to change them for your different types of events.
Yeah, and I always looked at it too, and maybe you kind of correct me or build upon this, but if you look at your organization's liability, and God forbid if something does happen, and something does end up in court, and maybe your organization or yourself, you get sued. I mean, at least at the very basic, if you've taken a course such as this, or better yet, even invested resources to purchase, a good book like this with a lot of instructions on mitigating these types of risks. I mean, at least if something bad does happen, you've exhibited the effort to, try that your organization has expanded the effort to show that they've tried to mitigate this before something like that happens. I mean, is that sort of accurate, Brenda?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We are all doing this because we are meeting professionals, and we care about our events. We care very much about our attendees. And yet we've not had a practical way to integrate what is a very complex and ever-changing process into our meeting designs. And so that is really what this is about. We don't do it because we don't want to do it. We don't do it because it's just so complex, and it's so difficult for us to take our time. And so what I've tried to do is narrow it down to what matters most. And if you understand, and with your team talk about, okay, did we investigate? Is there anything else we should know about this? What did we find out about? What things do we need to warn our sponsor about? What things do we need to justify that we have to hire? And then, I've even worked with one client that does 150 meetings all over the globe, and we have created a tiered system. So there are certain levels of meetings and events that are tier 1, and if they're tier 1, they get the whole thing, right? They're going to get security, they're going to get an EMT, they're going to have pre-event training, they're going to have hired police, because they fit the profile of a tier 1 event. And then they have a tier 2, and then they have a tier 3. And so they have it all organized, so their planners know, oh, well, this fits a tier 3. So I don't really need to hire extra security, and I don't need an EMT, because this is our regular monthly board meeting that's held down the street at, our local hotel. But we do need to have medical emergency cards for the meeting planners and those types of things. So it's a way that you can get some order around it. So this is actually what I love, because I think of this process as starting out where you're understanding what the duty of care is, but you're not quite sure how you're going to meet it, but you know what it is you're supposed to be, the standards you're supposed to be paying attention to. And then you start to build, and you decide how prepared you are and what you need to do to get really prepared, what needs to go into your risk management planning. You identify the foreseeable crises. And by the way, you will get to the point where you will say, for every single meeting, we will always have these foreseeable crises. You're always going to have medical. You're always going to have a power outage. I don't mean you're going to have them. You're always going to have these at risk. You could have medical. You could have a power outage. You could have a fire. You could have, and so on and so forth. And so you really don't have to do that every time, because you're going to have a master foreseeable crisis list that you should always be prepared for. And that then you have to rebuild. What you would add on to are things like threat, health threats, pandemic threats because of the area you're going to, or because of something known, demonstrators because of the political climate or the subject matter of your program, or you've already been demonstrated. So you have those that add on, but you're always going to have these certain ones. And so you have them on your crisis response plan. And the goal is to put everything in it and then to narrow it down into the place where it will fit. And it's the second to the last bullet. You want it to be able to fit on a wallet card. You want to be able to have what you need to know and what you need to train your team on needs to fit on a wallet card, because guess what? They can't read like a long document when they're in the middle of that crisis, right? When you're in that exhibit hall and somebody tells you there's two weird guys back here and they're cussing and they're calling people names, they're acting weird, you can't pull out or go to your iPad and pull up your security manual. I don't care how good that manual is, you can't. And your team is going to be scared to death. And your team is going to be, where's my wallet card? And I know, where's that phone number? You told me that I only have to remember 3 phone numbers or only 2 phone numbers. So where are they? Right? So the goal is to get it narrowed down to where it is something that becomes muscle memory and your team can go, when this happens, I know if a fire happens, typically in most places, these are the 3 things that are going to happen, and this is what I need to do. So we've identified that you're going to develop these crisis plans, and it's going to have every risk. It's going to tell who to call, how to get them, and what to do. This is for your team. You're going to give them situational awareness training. See something, say something. That's just should be ingrained in them. And the same thing with active shooter training. Frankly, I think that we're going to see a time sooner than later when all people in the meeting industry need to have active shooter training. I've had it. I want to have it because I know that could happen to me in anywhere in the world. If I'm on vacation, it could happen in a movie theater. So I want to know what the active shooter training is made of.
We actually, it's interesting. We had that in our headquarters. And it was, so we did a videotape, even wrote a story about it. And I believe it was handled through the local sheriff's department. And they came in and did a whole drill, which included people firing off blank rounds and such, and people huddling in offices. It was quite illuminating.
You know, it is. It's more than illuminating. It is terror. It can be terror filling. It can be terrifying. Mm-hmm. That's the word, terrifying.
Yeah.
But afterwards, whenever I'm doing a presentation, like I recently presented at MIC at the Colorado Convention Center, and I've done the training for the MIC team, and now they start, I've gotten them to start every one of their seminars and breakouts to have their speaker start with a safety moment. And the safety moment, we used to do that, and then it became an embarrassment. It was like, oh no, we don't want to scare people. We don't want gloom and doom. Well, we're in a different world, and I think people are really appreciative that, yeah, they don't want to be told that, but they're very appreciative, and they forget about it right away, but at least they know if you need to leave, you go down this hall, you turn left, and you're going to be, and then you need to actually walk it, because I've gone through evacuation trainings when you get down this dark hall or this long hall, and at the end, the door is locked. So I'm going to move on because I'm going off track here. But the crisis response plans, this next document is part of my template. So this is the template. So this is front and back, and it is a 3x5 card. So everything that I've just told you, we gather. Everything that the meeting and event team gathers in that pre-event risk mitigation process is whittled down to the venue emergency procedures. And this comes from to my audience responder who said, we need to do more with venues. You're absolutely right. This will have, you know, any of your venues, off-site venues, other than, of course, you'll have hotel. And sometimes you have to have a separate card if you have so many different venues for a big event. But these are the most foreseeable crises, right? Fire, weather, active shooter, civil disturbance, hazardous materials, bombs, lights, power outage, medical, and off-site. So there are others, and then on the other side of the card is the emergency contacts. So then these are the ones at the top, the most important contacts that you want your team to know. I try to give my team only 1 or 2 phone numbers. I go, if you forget everything, and you will forget everything because you're in a crisis, if you forget everything, have these programmed into your phone. And then I give, you know, depending on the rule for 911, it's like when you call 911, this is what you need to do. And then here we have chain of command, communication chain of command. We haven't even talked about communication strategy because that's coming up. But this is, you know, who's in charge of all the messaging. When that event was going on, it's not that person who's in charge of the exhibit hall who's going to be sending out the messaging. Somebody else on the team should have been designated, and maybe they're sitting in the staff office, or maybe they're sitting in the communication hub, but they should be ready with a certain red phone, and they should be ready with messaging already prepared, how it's going to go out and how they're going to manage the tweets and how are they going to show it on Facebook, and when do they contact media, all of that. That is a completely separate piece of this plan. So you can see how this is condensed down into the most important phone numbers. And then this becomes manageable to your team. And we actually, sorry, I'm like hitting the wrong, oh, here we go. I've taken you to the end. We actually reduce this further into a wallet card. So we pull out only the numbers and the key people and put on a wallet card. So people have that as well. All right, so we're getting toward the end, but also not the least important is having a communication plan. And this is one thing that a lot of teams just don't have time to do, or they don't have another designated person, and it all falls on the lead planner to be the head of communication. But no matter how you do it, it's very important that you have a decision tree with respect to communicating. Who has authority to send out messaging? You know, when does your CEO or your senior VP of marketing, when do they need to speak? When do they need to authorize messaging? The more serious the crisis, the more serious the messaging becomes. So you need your own roles and responsibilities for communicating. A social media blow up, as you know, can spread rapidly. So if you have to identify your channels, you know, who's handling the media, who's messaging the attendees, how are you reaching the attendees? Do you have a pre-selected hashtag for attendees to use if there's crisis and they need to check in and let you know they're okay? The mobile app is, you know, a great resource, but not everybody will use a mobile app. So what's your backup to the mobile app? You can use the event website. You can use your company website. Whatever it is, you need to make sure that you have those identified. And this takes a lot of work in advance. You cannot put together a communication strategy when you're in the middle of a crisis. So there's a lot more to be said about that, but I want to get to one of my favorite pieces of this, and there are really good webinars and seminars taught on contract clauses. But contracts are the way that you can transfer or share the risk. And so you start very early with every contract that you have. and either integrate some of these clauses or integrate language. And I'll just give you a brief overview. But as I said earlier, when you've identified all of your responders and your resources, who is going to be available to help you in any of these crises, you have a clause in their contract that they will participate in a risk management rehearsal with you. They will participate in safety and security training with you. They will disclose early on their emergency procedures clause. And I know that many of you probably have had the experience, especially in talking to hotels. I think this is changing, but I even had it as recently as 2 years ago with a large convention center on the East Coast where I was helping with a 5,000 person conference. And the head of security was, he wasn't refusing to give me their procedures, but they, you know, you will be told, well, we have a lot of confidential procedures. And so I, you know, and it's like, we can't really give you our confidential procedures because it could put us at risk. You know, a person with malintent could get a hold of these procedures and it would help them, you know, with their plan to come in and threaten the center. So I did draft in advance a very professional, very polite letter that is sent to the head of security for the convention center, the hotel, for, you know, anyone that you need to get the procedures from. And it explains that the company that is, you know, coming to host their event at the convention center is dedicated to the safety of their attendees. And as such, they participate in the risk management planning process and so on and so forth. And they you list all the foreseeable crises that they are looking to help train their team in knowing what to do. And they would appreciate a meeting. And so we set up a meeting, and it's, you know, it's an early meeting right after the contract is signed. And it's amazing how they come around and they participate from the beginning in working with you and your events team to train the vendors and to train anyone else, and to also conduct the pre-con safety and security session. I've even had them tell me that they can't tell me anything. And then later on when I say, okay, we were here last year, I'd like an update on have you had any serious crises, or have you had any, you know, deaths, or tell me what's happened. You know, is there something I need to know? You would think they wouldn't tell me, but they tell me everything that's gone on. Oh, well, we just had a car, you know, a truck run into the front of the, you know, the main entrance, and they tell me everything. And of course, I keep all of that in confidence, but I want to know what has gone on, and then how did they handle it? And did they change anything with their insurance? And is there anything that my client needs to know? So when I said in the beginning that it's the whole hospitality industry, we're all in this together. And I think that the meeting industry has an opportunity to be leaders and to open the door to our partner vendors, to our suppliers, to the other venues, to just open the door to that conversation, open the door to sharing what are our combined emergency procedures, so that when something goes wrong, like that scenario that you all just went through, the person sitting at the front, the meeting planner, knows immediately what the trade show manager, who is in charge with the trade show professional who's there to manage the booths. He or she is there. So the meeting planner should know right away, how do I reach that person? What is that person going to be doing? How are they going to help me? How is the audiovisual company going to be helping me? What can we rely on them to do? We all have to come together. You can't do it if you wait when you're being threatened. And so putting this clause in your contract helps. Then moving to, you all have indemnification clauses in all of your contracts, and you just need to make sure that you and your company is indemnified against acts of negligence and gross negligence committed by the other party if it results in, unfortunately, death or damage due to some type of a crisis, so that you're sharing the risk or you're transferring the risk, if you know what I'm saying. Limitation of liability, we all see that usually the parties want to cap the damages to the value of the contract. You should always look at capping the damages up to the insurance coverage, especially damages if you're getting sued for negligence for not handling a crisis well. Force majeure clauses are, they're all over the board. I see so many different kinds of force majeure clauses, and you should always try to get the word threat in there. You should have, instead of violence or terrorism, it should be threat of violence or threat of terrorism. And especially include a waiver of attrition and minimums. If your event is delayed, but it can go on, or you lose attendance because of some type of a crisis, especially a weather crisis. I went through Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Matthew for the same client, the same event, different years. And we learned to put, threat of a weather disturbance that would reduce the attendance of the event will waive attrition minimum. So, I mean, that's a financial situation, and then again, we talked about DMC and vendor clauses. Make sure the E&O and professional liability and event cancellation insurance are all included. So I've gone through that pretty quickly, and I think we're coming really to the end and ready for some comments and questions. But the last step in your playbook, and you can't leave this out, it's recovery and evaluate. I know that everyone in this audience knows the elements that go into an after action review. It's the same elements that you do an after action review for your program. You do a debrief on your program, so you want to construct an after action review of the crisis. You want to document the crisis. You want to identify, what went well, where the gaps were. You have to have incident reports on anything that happened, even a skinned knee. You have to have an incident report and make sure that you know in advance who's in charge of the insurance claims processes. And most importantly is you have your recommendations for your risk management for future events. So I've kind of come to going through the 6 elements that tell you how you're going to meet your duty of care. And I can say with confidence that once you go through this process with your team and you've developed your company risk management strategy that follows the duty of care, you're dedicated to the safety of attendees and to meeting your duty of care, and you identify those 6 elements, your team in the end is going to feel personally safer. They are going to feel informed, empowered, and in control. And in particular, the degree to which you continue doing situational training and rehearsals for some of those crises, the stronger your team is going to be in terms of handling any type of threatened disruption or crisis. So I just want to thank you for your attention. And I see I have 17 chats. So we have a few minutes, Tyler, to go through.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wonderful. And one of the big questions is, from one of the listeners who's been planning for like 40 years or so, but how do you convince the executives to spend money on something like this?
Well, I do have one slide that I try to explain that. But I mean, I think the best way I've seen this happen, and this happened recently to me when it was a senior vice president of marketing for a large association, and they have done this 10,000 person meeting year after year. And I hate to tell tales out of school, but I think I have permission because I'm not.
Go ahead.
The director for their meetings and events team, who's just this fabulous woman, and she's so talented, and she's amazing. She told me, she said, I want to hire you as a consultant because I can't get him to spend a dime on having food served for 5 hours during, the middle of the afternoon all the way through the evening. And we have alcohol and liquor flowing by our sponsors all day long. And he doesn't think we're at risk by not having any food, not even any purchased food. So, he didn't want to spend the money. And, I took a big gulp and I said, well, if he'll spend the money on having me come in to train your team, I'll do it under one condition. He has to be present in this training. And so, he was in the meeting and, he was in support of it, but it wasn't until I got the head of the police department in District 8, which is the convention center and the French Quarter, an amazing person. I got him to come in and he spoke to this group. And when he talked to the group about the liability and the risk that event organizers have and the things that happen, he was not talking to scare him, but he just was talking about what really happens and talking more about what the police will do for them before the event. It completely turned this executive around. And not only that, but he wrote a full executive briefing. It went all the way up to the CEO. And because I had them identify, I said, what are your biggest foreseeable crises? One was crowd control, people getting trampled, drinking too much alcohol, and having, serious accidents. And these were all their foreseeable crises that were putting them at risk. And then we identified what kind of social media blow up could happen if people start, sending tweets out and Facebook posts and everything else of your attendees in this condition. What is that going to do to your reputation? And how much does it cost to have this food compared to the cost of this? And so, it's a sensitive thing because you do want to have them realize that it's the right thing to do, and it's also going to improve their brand image. It's going to be, they have to look at it like think of it as a corporate social responsibility initiative, that you have a responsibility as an organization who is inviting attendees to come to this wonderful program. But with that responsibility comes a duty to keep them safe and the cost to keep them safe. And as a planner, you need to have your homework done. But there are, I believe it's either IRF or I can't remember which survey was done recently. I think it was IRF that actually has exact average cost, like the cost for an organization to deal with a social media blow up. Where it's like the average cost of a social media blow up is like $99,000 to do the damage, to undo the damage from your brand. And then not to mention, how much does it cost to just defend a lawsuit? Even if you're not negligent, how much does it cost to defend a lawsuit and be found not negligent? So you can get real granular on the financial cost. Yeah. You really do have to understand where your executive is coming from and what is his objection to this. And then you have to be able to show him, like a good meeting planner can do, is how you can make it fit in the budget, right? And right. If you don't put it in the budget and this happens to you, it's going to cost you a whole lot more. but you really want them to do it because it's the right thing to do, not because they're afraid of being sued.
Right. Excellent. Yeah. Well, thanks. And we're getting, we're kind of running over time here, and I'll let everyone know that we will get to some of your questions in our Take 10 feature after the webinar, so don't fret about that. We should probably wrap it up now. Thank you, Brenda. This is the first 2-hour one we've done, and you really quite an inspiring program, and really I think you did a fantastic job. It's such a complex subject too, so thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you to everyone in the audience. Like I said, I was very excited to have such a big audience today to be able to speak to, even though I can't see your faces or hear your voices. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. And as we close out the presentation, there's just a few important pieces of information we'd like to share. Join us on April 10th at 1 p.m. Eastern for Missed Connections. You just missed your most important contact, presented by Brooke Gracie. And then join us again on April 24th, also at 1 p.m. Eastern for Site and Destination Selection with Accommodation and ADA in Mind, presented by Joan Eisenstadt. And we just actually, she just did a great sort of checklisty type of story on going above and beyond ADA requirements for accommodation. So that's on our website. So definitely check that out. It's great information. We hope you can join us for the webinars, also available on our website. There's a vault of information on past webinars available to view at any time at your convenience. Simply visit meetingstoday.com/webinars to learn more about these events, or click on-demand webinars and you can watch now. As always, we'd like to thank our sponsors. Thank you to our sponsors in the East, Providence, Warwick, CVB, and Meet Atlantic City. Our sponsors in the West, Anaheim Majestic Garden Hotel. Our sponsors in Mid-America, Sioux Falls CVB, and Doubletree by Hilton Hotel, Cedar Rapids Convention Complex. And then our sponsors in the South, Kiowa Island Golf Resort and Asheville area CVB. Upon completion of the webinar, you will be redirected to today's related webinar club page. Each webinar has its own unique webinar club page where you can download the presentation, view the webinar on demand, obtain your CMP credit certificate, and so much more. Today's webinar club page is located at meetingstoday.com/webinar club risk management. And if you're not automatically redirected, you may also visit our website at meetingstoday.com, hover over the webinars tab in the navigation area and click on Webinar Club in the drop-down menu. Thanks again to Brenda and to all of you for joining us for this webinar today. Have a great day, and we hope to see you again soon.